Hello, and welcome to our podcast on storytelling and plot in Hollywood. Here we're going to be talking about the plot structure that we use in class and how we have moved from the basic plot map through the hero's journey into the 4 stages of plot development that will drive how we look at films. Let's go ahead and see what we're talking about. So first off, what is plot? That is defined as the chain of events occurring in time and space that are linked by cause and effect. So basically, events and actions don't happen randomly. Something begins our story, characters begin to move, things happen, it pushes the characters to change and grow and to enter on some sort of adventure. They're of course faced with challenges and enemies, they are helped by allies, etc. And then kind of go from there. Things happen for a reason of cause and effect. And so that is going to be our working definition of plot, whether we're looking at a book, piece of drama, or a film, as in this class. And so when we start talking about plot, we have probably seen this very basic plot map since elementary school. Most texts do follow this. We have some sort of exposition where we start off, things get exciting in the rising action. We have some sort of massive climax, a high point of action, high point of excitement, and then the story ends. And so we've been using that in most literature classes since elementary school. If we turn it up a notch, we can overlay this idea of the hero's journey. It still basically follows that plot map, but it's now broken down into 10 or 12 steps depending on what you're looking at. The hero's journey or the heroic cycle, pretty archetypal, meaning it's in different types of texts from different cultures, from different parts of the world, from different times throughout history. It's very standard in terms of how characters move and what they do and how they grow. And you can see those 12 common steps there that pretty much overlap with that basic plot map. Where we had exposition before, we have the ordinary world and the call to adventure. Where we had rising action before, which means, something's happening. We have the refusal of the call. We have a mentor. We enter the unknown and they have challenges. So it's in essence the same thing, but we're just kind of splitting each simple stage into a couple more to get a little bit more specific when we start to look at more complicated pieces of literature. And so as we move into film class, we will talk about plot in both the hero's journey steps and in these 4 plot stages. So our model uses 4 stages to describe the plots of movies. So something kind of interesting, those stages are approximately mathematically evenly divided over the course of a film. You can take a 120-minute film, subtract about 8 to 10 minutes for the credits, take whatever time is left, divide that by 4, and you get that each stage will be about 25 to 28 minutes long, depending on the overall length of the film. So the 4 plot stages that we'll talk about in a minute are mathematically evenly divided over most movies, which is pretty interesting. And in each stage, there are clear elements of plot. So we have that hero's journey with 12 steps through it. The 4 stages we will talk about just kind of sit on top of that, and very clear and distinct things happen in each stage. It is unusual that something does not happen in those 4 progressively linear stages. But there is always variation. So not to throw a wrench into the whole thing, while we're going to be talking about patterns and very clear patterns across many types of Hollywood and independent and small studio films, we're going to always be looking for that variation. That's what keeps us coming back. If we just said, well, hey, the hero's journey is this, we know what's going to happen, and hey, at 25 minutes in there will always be an exciting event, then why would we even bother going? Knowing the structure helps us feel a sense of comfort, kind of predictive where this is going. It helps us figure out complicated films, but we also go because we want to see the variation. We want to see somebody messing with those traditions. So what are the 4 stages? We use these 4 terms. Stage 1 is going to be called the setup. And that is approximately steps 1, 2, 3, and 4-ish of the hero's journey. Then you're going to move into stage 2, which is complicating action. That is from elementary school, rising action. That is from the hero's journey, the idea of entering the unknown, getting tests, ordeals, allies, and enemies. Basically, there's stuff to do. Stage 3, we will call the development, and this is also on that rising action slope. Development, you'll see, is a time when you could probably walk out of a movie and not miss anything new. All the goals will have already been put into place. The characters just need to churn through the challenge. And then stage 4, we call that Climax and Epilogue. And you can see how that overlaps with the hero's journey there. It overlaps with that supreme ordeal, the largest challenge the character has to face, usually by themselves. And so that is our climax in a film, very similarly. And then the film needs to end. We just need to get to the end, roll credits, we're done. That's the epilogue. So let's go ahead and see what goes into each of these steps in a more detailed fashion. So like we said, stage 1 is the setup. This is going to be approximately the first 25 minutes of a movie. And the typical things that happen is setting is established. So that's going to be location, time, and limits and pressures. And you can watch our setting podcast to learn more about those limits and pressures that setting put on characters. It's kind of an interesting theoretical part. But this is what is going to happen in stage 1. We need to see where the action is taking place. We need to meet the dynamic characters. And just like in literature class, we're going to have static, dynamic, and foil pairs of characters. Cool thing about film is that characteristics of any character who comes on screen are set at that character's first entrance. So we are to assume that any character we see is who they are and how they are behaving, unless we see something that encourages them to change. So using that literary language, we are to assume that any character we see is static. And so, back to the hero's journey, we see the character in their ordinary world. They're just doing their business, they're just in their setting, living their best life. In film, this is also approximately in stage 1 where we introduce what we call a double goal. So the character has some job to do, live their best life. But then typically in most mainstream movies, we get a double goal, which is usually a love interest. Now the baseball player can't just work to make it to the major leagues. That person needs to find a partner. Now we can't just search for the Lost Ark. We have to find a love interest. These 3 things, setting, meeting characters, and introduce the double goal, tend to happen in the first 25 minutes of any movie. So if we apply that to one of the films we'll be watching in class and to a pretty well-known classic film, we can look at Raiders of the Lost Ark. Stage 1 is about 25 minutes of that film. We meet Indiana Jones. We figure out the setting. Okay, he's an archaeologist who steals stuff, but he's also a professor who teaches students at some university. We figure out who he is, what he likes, doesn't like. We figure out kind of who he is and what his point in life is. Then he is placed on the hero's journey. He has to go find the Ark. But lo and behold, one of the people he has to meet in order to move forward on that journey is a woman named Marion. And so needless to say, the goal is to find the Ark, but then of course he's going to fall in love with this person who has a key to the puzzle. So stage 2, once we have introduced setting and characters and the main goal and typically the double goal, we're going to move to that next 25 minutes in a film. There will probably be a noticeable shift. The character has been placed on the journey. They begin going. Cause and effect has happened. Something has caused them to move forward. This is where we have the new challenge for those characters. They've left their ordinary world and they are on the hero's journey. They're doing something. We're trying to figure out what the point of the movie is. So this is stage 2. It's about 25 minutes long. Going back to Raiders, pretty mathematical. This is the next 25 minutes in that movie. There is a noticeable shift. We're not just paying attention to Indiana Jones as he teaches in his university classroom. This is now Indiana Jones out to find the Ark. And so this is stage 2, the doing of the challenge. He has to go to Egypt. He has to ask the old man to help interpret something on the medallion. He has to find the Well of the Souls. He has to find the Ark. And that is the next 25 minutes of this movie. Stage 3 then is what we call the development. This is the third 25 minutes approximately in a film. The main goals are in place. This is an interesting stage because this is just where we have more challenges and obstacles that delay the accomplishment or the failure of the character on that journey. It sounds a little strange, but this stage is pretty unimportant for the climax of the movie. We know what our characters are trying to do, and stage 3 just presents more obstacles for the characters. We don't really need to see these obstacles or challenges in order to get to the climax, and nothing new in terms of goals is added at this point. This is very similar to the tests, ordeals, allies, and enemy stage of the hero's journey. It's just churn. It's just more stuff thrown in the character's way in order to reach or not reach that climax. So it might be easier to apply that to Raiders to see what we're talking about. The development is the third 25 minutes in a film. The main goal for Indiana Jones is in place. He has to get the Ark. And at the end of stage 2, he did get the Ark. He had it in his hands. He and his friend lifted it from the Well of the Souls and took it out, and they were ready to get it home. Stage 3 of the movie, though, just gives a series of challenges and obstacles that delay whether he will or won't actually take possession of the Ark. For example, he and Marion are dropped back into the Well of the Souls to fight off snakes. Then the Nazis put the Ark on a plane, so he has to stop the plane. Then the Nazis put the Ark on a truck, so he has to get it back from the truck. Then the Nazis take it and put it on a boat. We don't really need to see all of those obstacles in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark in order to get to the end, which is the climax, which is, will Indiana Jones get the Ark or will the Nazis get the Ark? So while stage 3, the development is exciting and interesting, and where we're having all kinds of crazy cinematic events and special effects and stuff like that, from the plot level, we don't really need to have this. We could skip this and go from, okay, Indiana Jones has it at the end of stage 2. It's been taken away in stage 3. Will he get it back in stage 4? And so stage 4 is that climax and epilogue. It's about the last 20-25 minutes of the film. So we have to see this climax. We have to see this highest point of action. We have to see this supreme ordeal, to go back to that hero's journey overlap. Will the characters accomplish or not accomplish their goals of the film? And once we have seen whether they will or will not accomplish those goals, we get into the epilogue, which should be a relatively quick wrap-up of the film. Like the hero's journey, this is the end of it. The character has either succeeded or failed. They're either happy with that or upset, kind of spurring a sequel. They have grown, changed, transformed. They have learned something on their journey. The same thing happens in film. Interesting thing about the epilogue in films is that we don't want this to drag on. Once the characters have achieved or not achieved their goal and have learned their lesson or become frustrated enough that they're going to move on to a sequel, the film should pretty much end. Some examples where the epilogue is too long: Hot Fuzz and The Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. If you really analyze these two, you see that the climax happens, characters do or don't accomplish their goal, and the film drags on for a couple minutes too long. And so while we say that the climax and epilogue should be relatively quick, should wrap that film up and move on, sometimes movies don't. And you can see this as you practice with film. They just feel uncomfortable. It's a little bit too long of an epilogue. Going back to Raiders, stage 4 is approximately the last 20 minutes of the film. This is where the Nazis have taken the Ark from Indiana Jones, put it on their submarine, and they've gone to this Mediterranean island, and they plan to open the Ark and to see what's inside. This is stage 4, because the question becomes, who's going to end this film with possession of the Ark? Is it going to be Indiana Jones, or is it going to be the dreaded Nazis? And so that whole scene of being on the island, having their ceremony, opening it up, and then everybody getting their face melted by the Ark, that is the climax. And once the Nazis are destroyed, not to give anything away, but spoiler alert, the movie's been out for 20 years. Once the Nazis have been melted, it is clear that Indiana Jones will accomplish his goal. He will take possession of the Ark, and he will have accomplished his double goal as well, because at the very end of the film, he and Marion seem to be friendly enough that they're going to, we assume, start a relationship and move on. And then the epilogue. We see Indiana Jones talking to some Army intelligence people saying, hey, we've got the Ark, we're taking good care of it, we're going to be examining it by top men, and then we're going to put it away somewhere. That's it. Roll credits, we're done. And so like clockwork, that climax and epilogue stage hit the last 20 minutes of the film. They take approximately 20 minutes, and we're done. Now, some structures that film analysts use have 3 acts rather than 4 stages. It's a terminology thing, and I can see how they overlap with our 4 stages of plot development. Just from our class's creation, we have subscribed to the 4 stages model, while some other classes have chosen to use the 3 plot stages of film. And so you can see the overlap there. Act 1, they call it, is in essence the overlap with setup. Act 2 is the overlap with complicating action and development. And then Act 3 is the overlap with climax and epilogue. The most noticeable difference is that we take Act 2 and divide it into two smaller groupings. We call it complicating action and development, whereas other film classes may just call it Act 2. So in essence, they're all building on the plot map, then the hero's journey, and then structuring that towards film. So very similar, but just in case you come across somebody saying, well, the 3-act structure, it's the same thing. We just choose to split Act 2 into two smaller groupings. So like we said before, if the pattern is so common, why do we bother even watching movies? And I think that's a great question. There is always that comfort in knowing that the hero's journey is an undercurrent of any film. There is that great comfort in knowing that in every evenly divided time, we're going to get a plot stage change. But we keep coming back because we want to see the great variety. How do scriptwriters and directors play with this structure? How do they fool us? How do they withhold one tiny piece of information to make us think that character A is good when really character A is bad? How do they use a non-linear film technique in order to tell that story? There's so many great non-linear films out there. Pulp Fiction, Inception, 500 Days of Summer. We could go on and on. So even when we think we have figured this thing out, somebody throws something new into the mix, and that's why we keep going. So just because we've mastered the hero's journey, or we've mastered what goes into these 4 plot stages, there's always something new. And I think that's what should encourage us to keep watching and keep challenging ourselves as directors and writers are challenging us. So that is about it for now. Please work on understanding how the plot map evolves into the hero's journey, which evolves into the 4 plot stages that we will use in this class. And as you watch more and more film, you'll start to see how they are mathematically equal in most major Hollywood films and the things that we typically watch. And so it becomes this fun game where you can almost set your watch to it and say, hey, movie starts, set my watch. In about 25 minutes, there's going to be an exciting event. And almost like clockwork, there it is. Which could be helpful when you're really trying to work on dissecting something very complicated and confusing. You can fall back on this plot structure and understand where you are typically, where this film happens to be going, and where you predict it might end up. So that's about it. As always, if you have any questions, please bring those in the class. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.